thanks, Jeremy, and thanks to everybody who made time. All of you are busy people. All of you are busy people. This is an especially busy time this semester. And I think there's something like 7 other book launches going on campus today. So I'm really all the more touched that you came to mine. I guess there's maybe 2 or 3. I'm just kidding. Anyway, before I begin, I want to acknowledge one important individual in the audience. This book is dedicated to my spouse, my partner in life, Rita, who's in the audience. And just remember, a warning: if you criticize the book, you criticize her. So this project was conceived in the 1990s at a time when every function of government was under duress and under severe criticism, not just from the right, but from the left, and mostly from the right. And I think it was a time also when just about every agency of government was wondering how it might justify its own existence as well as its budget and how long it might live. And the roots of that conflict, by the way, are not merely political and founded in the 1994 Republican takeover of Congress and Gingrich, but also are at some level academic, such as in the usual guesswork that goes on about whether a certain form of regulation addresses a market failure, and if not, then well, it's ipso facto illegitimate. That kind of thinking, whether it was market failure thinking or other forms of thinking, whether in the legal academy, in the social sciences, elsewhere, it was profoundly ingrained, and is in some sense, still in some respects, profoundly ingrained in the way that we approach regulation. But that was kind of the height of it, the 1990s. And on one of my occasional drives to go across Michigan to fish, or maybe just to escape Ann Arbor for a couple of days, I drove past a black and white billboard without a single photographic image. And it read simply as follows: generic medicines, period. Safe, period. Effective, period. FDA approved, period. In the context of the political times, particularly in the state of Michigan, home to the Michigan militia, and particularly libertarian politics at the time, the idea that any company would be using a federal agency's name in acronym form as an endorsement for one of its products, in fact, as an endorsement for the whole industry's products, struck me as rather odd. And maybe on reflection with the FDA, we shouldn't regard it as odd, but at the time I did strike me as odd. It didn't strike me as unjustified, but it struck me as, what was it about the FDA that marked such an exception, or at least a potential exception, to the politics of the time. Interestingly enough, after this manuscript was completed, I was in Santa Monica, California a few months ago, and I was driving again, not to go fishing. And I saw another billboard, and this one was about a lap band. And it had a svelte woman in it, and she was showing off her new figure. And it also remarked that the lap band had been FDA approved. And the billboard and she and everything, it looked great, you know. But what was really amazing to me, again, was the fact that a government agency has become billboard material in a positive way and not necessarily a negative way. And so this book, at some level, is about the intertwining of those images. It's the everyday images that the FDA, in which the FDA sort of enters our life, our daily discourse, television ads, billboards, things like that, and power. And reputation, just briefly, is defined kind of as a sort of a set of beliefs embedded in audiences. And so for those of you who are social scientists, this work probably owes its greatest intellectual debt to Irving Goffman, who's a sociologist and a social psychologist. It was his work in the presentation of self in everyday life and other work that began to sort of get me to think a lot more about how the same agency might present different faces to different audiences, not in a way that was necessarily inappropriate or unethical, but in ways that furthered its own mission. And those faces of reputation are themselves discussed in the book, both theoretically and historically. And there's what I call performative reputation. Does the agency kind of get it right? And there's technical reputation, so whether or not the agency gets it right. Is it qualified? Does it have the right people with the right PhDs? That sort of thing. There's the legal procedural reputation, which is kind of very important in the United States, where all the sorts of rules have to follow the Administrative Procedure Act of 1947. and so forth. And then there's the moral reputation, where you can be asking a company that's developing a cancer drug to dot all of its I's and cross all of its T's, and yet come in for severe criticism for not being sufficiently flexible, where people's lives are at stake. And just sort of a taste of some of the reputation that sort of comes up here, maybe from a time in which the FDA was getting heavily criticized. We're right in the period of the 50th anniversary of the pill, or oral contraceptive medicine, and there's going to be, I gather, because I was just talking with this guy Gardner Harris of the New York Times, a couple of stories in the New York Times about the way that the pill transformed American society. But actually, the stories about the pill and oral contraceptives in this book are actually not from the late 1950s, early 1960s, but from the late 60s and early 70s, well after it had become a consumer and cultural artifact. I want to posit that there were sort of critical issues at the interface of modern consumer culture, labeling, and for that matter, post-market safety, and in ways that almost helped infuse the fields of pharmacoepidemiology and others with some crucial problematics for their development. I think Jerry Abraham here, a leader in those fields, so we wanted to acknowledge him.